Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to New Jersey's Association of Lifelong Learning Annual Conference. I am Linda Roma, this year's board president, and along with the entire board, I extend a warm welcome and our heartfelt gratitude to each of you for being with us again this year over the next couple days. It really is nice to see everybody and to be together again. We were looking forward to the possibility of being together in person, up close and personally on the Brookdale campus. However, we decided that it may be a good thing to do it remote again this year. We did receive excellent feedback from you saying that this venue actually works very well. And if you're like Ryan, you can attend all 13 sessions. So that possibility remains viable for you. So hopefully it still works this year, doing it remotely. This year's theme, Working Towards Digital Equity, is so relevant, timely, and on point, given the many challenges we all face each day trying to implement our GED and ESL programs. We all knew there was a digital divide and inequity, but as with all great instructors and tutors, mentors, and administrators, we made it work and we made it look easy. However, with the COVID pandemic impacting the work we do and forcing us to switch, and in many cases in a nanosecond, to online and remote learning, it forced us to look at this in a different way. It could no longer be ignored as an issue, nor can it be just managed. It needs to be actively addressed. The good news is our collective voices and concerns have been heard by the good folks at DOL in Trenton. They have been working very hard with our state director, Danielle Richardson, and her entire team to ensure that we have the resources that we need in FY23 to address the digital divide. There is a plan in place. We have a directors roundtable meeting on June 11th, so I'm sure more to be revealed at that time. We all recognize the value of a conference. We hear stimulating workshops, we gather tools and resources that we get to bring back to our programs. And very simply, it's just very energizing to participate in a conference. However, it is also an opportunity to gather together the state educators and like-minded folks from every county, every consortium, classroom, and office throughout the entire state of New Jersey to acknowledge the work and advocacy that is being done each year on behalf of our students. So kudos to all of you. At this time, I would like to acknowledge and extend a huge thank you to Eric Jacobson, the Program Development Committee Chairperson, and the entire committee for once again hosting a conference that is relevant, on point, and I'm sure is going to have something of great value for everyone. Eric, we know that this will be another outstanding conference. We don't doubt that. At this time, I'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge and thank the entire NJALL board. Most of you know NJALL for our wonderful conferences, the webinars we host throughout the year, and through our scholarship program, as that has supported many of our students. However, there are many committees working behind the scenes, including finance, treasury, board development, constitutional and bylaw, award, scales, communication, and advocacy. And I didn't have them committed to memory, so I did have to look at my notes on that. So there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes to make all this happen. And it's an honor and it's a pleasure for me to serve with each of you. The board also acknowledges and wants to thank each presenter for stepping up and hosting a workshop and sharing their expertise. We also appreciate our continued partnership with the folks at DOL in Trenton and the relationship we have with the ABE state leadership. And to each of you who play a part in changing lives every day. And lastly, but not least, and probably most importantly, to all our students who, despite many challenges, make it to our classrooms each day. In closing, I would like to share two short quotes with you from one of my favorite poets, who is a 13th century mystic, Rumi. And the first one quote is, "Yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. Today I am wise, so I am changing myself." And then the second quote, which I thought was relevant to our conference and what we're going through in these changing times, is, "What you seek is seeking you. The true reality is right in front of you, though hidden. You need only turn on the light of awareness, banish the illusions, and find peace in wisdom." Thank you very much. Welcome again to the conference, and I look forward to seeing all of you over the next few days. Eric, I'll send it back to you.
All right, thanks, Linda. Thanks for being the president for the last year of NJALL. So although I think I'm the only person in the world that calls it NJALL, and everybody else calls it NJALL. So I'm still an out-of-stater, even after 16 years that I'm calling it NJALL. So yes, so now we're moving on to our first session. So I was very happy that Priyanka Sharma agreed to give the plenary and to give a workshop tomorrow on the topic of digital equity. This is a renewed interest of the associations. We've got an advocacy brief drafted that we're going to soon circulate to the field, and I'm sure we're going to refine it on the basis of things that we hear today and over the course of this week. So what I'd like to do is turn it over to Priyanka. I'm going to follow along in the chat area. There's going to be some times where she's going to ask for your feedback or your thoughts. And what I'm going to do is I'll monitor those. If there's just one person, I may unmute you or share your thoughts. Or if 3 or 4 people give a similar response, I'll synthesize them and pass them along to Priyanka. Okay. So then without any further ado, thanks for joining us today, Priyanka.
Thank you, Eric. Let me just take a minute and before I get started, just pull up the slides. And just want to make sure that you're able to see the slides.
Yep.
All right. Okay, do you see that in full screen?
Yes.
Perfect. So hello, everyone. I'm Priyanka Sharma. It's a pleasure, true pleasure to be here with all of you today. I lead the U.S. portfolio of World Education. We're a global nonprofit based in Boston. And it's lovely to see familiar faces here from being together at conferences and some dear colleagues like Eric. So really happy to be here. As we get started today, I just want to congratulate you all for making it through these difficult 2 years and just doing what you do. And also want to apologize in advance if I have to take a pause and cough. I'm still getting over a throat thing. So that might cause some disruption, but hopefully not too much. And as we get started today, what I wanted to do is really take a step back from this idea of digital equity and thinking and help us all get to the 30,000 foot view and think about digital equity in general, how we have experienced it, the digital divide, how our communities have experienced it, and where the problem is and what are some of the solutions. And tomorrow morning, I hope you will all join me as we look into some programs, approaches, and resources and go deeper within that. That workshop will lead to a lot of classroom ready, program ready resources that you should be able to integrate it in your programming right away. So without further ado, I'll get started. And the idea is I will ask you to either unmute yourself towards the end as you have questions and otherwise share things in the chat. I would love to know who's here. So if you want to just put in your name, get that chat window a little oiled up, of the role you play and just which program you're from, so that all of us can see who's here in the virtual room. As we get started, and you put your name and role and program in the chat, I would also want to have you take a moment and think about what is something that you wouldn't have been able to do without your current access to technology today, apart from this space we're in right now. And what is something you wouldn't have been able to do without your current digital skills? And what would have happened if you weren't able to do those tasks? So just take a moment. You don't have to start typing right away. Just look at the content on the screen and sort of share in the chat. Any reflections you have for these questions? So something that you wouldn't have been able to do without your current access to technology since this morning, just today. Somebody says Wordle. That is so true. That's the first thing I do every morning. So that would be a huge problem if I didn't have access to Wordle in the morning, to life's little pleasures. And, you know, Lori talks about how it's basically all the way from the digital calendar to looking up phone numbers. It connects us all to our communities, friends and family members, in different ways, through mobile technology, through computers, through email and other means. So think about the connective tissue that technology and the right digital skills that go with the technology provides to the people and all of us. And imagine if you didn't have either one of them, where you still wanted to connect to life and work, but were not able to because you didn't have the right device, or the device was old, or the data was expensive. And that's kind of what we need to keep in mind as we get into the next half an hour, 45 minutes of thinking about digital equity and thinking about what digital inclusion means, and most of all, what digital exclusion means, and how hundreds and thousands of folks in New Jersey and millions in this country are being digitally excluded even to this day, and what we can do where we are to help bridge that digital divide. And keep those answers coming, because I think it's just good to kind of remind ourselves how critical access to digital technology and digital skills is in this day and age. Pre-pandemic, it was more very important to have it, but today it has, over the past 2 years and moving forward, it has become critical to basically survival at this point, because as most of us, 80% of the workforce still works online, remotely, and kids are accessing technology to deal with learning loss and move forward beyond that. So having sort of made the case of how important it is, what I think is also important to know, and I hope you can see some of the percentages here. This talks about how the access to internet and devices, and this is for K-12 systems. When they say student, it's not adult learners. You can kind of see how, the states, I live in Massachusetts, you all live in New Jersey, perhaps, I'm assuming, we're doing pretty well when it comes to access to broadband internet and devices in general, but having 83.7% having access to internet and devices is actually pretty dismal, because what about the rest? The rest is where I think the issue lies, and I think that percentage, which is in hundreds of thousands, is kind of where our learners a lot of times are, where they either don't have access to broadband internet or devices. And in the image on the far right, you'll see that there's a map there of New Jersey in different colors. The lighter the color is, it means that people are accessing the internet only using their phone. So they don't have the right device to connect to it. So, and we'll get a little bit more into access and exclusion in a little bit, but I think this all is really important to sort of hold and center yourselves in as we move forward. So, I think this is obvious that digital equity is needed for full society participation. I remember 2 years ago, we used to have to make a stronger case for digital divide and digital equity, because everybody just assumed that others were connected and we were all doing fine. And then the pandemic sort of laid that the divide for all of us to kind of see, and for millions of us to experience, where people were not able to get on their school classes, not access college courses, and not even hold on to their jobs because they were not able to work remotely or have the right digital skills. And something to really understand how digital equity is not just something for us to think about for the good of our hearts and, but and the betterment of society. It is a matter of survival now. And that's kind of where the idea is to really think about how our programs, how we're designing our programs, how we're delivering instruction so that digital equity is at the center of it as we design that programming. And we do have some resources to help you think about it. And then I'll go deeper into that tomorrow morning, so that you'll walk away with like a digital equity action plan for your program that you should be able to think about the digital equity programming that we all need to think to implement in our programs. So coming to the time and space we're still in the midst of the pandemic. Sometimes it's easy to forget as we're all tiring out of the situation we're in, but the thing to understand is something that Linda said and Eric said at the very beginning. We have been able to pivot and deliver instruction and keep a lot of the programs, if not all of the programs, open and move forward during the pandemic. And I would like to take this moment to hear more about what have you been doing? How did you, and feel free to either unmute yourself or put it in the chat, about what is it that happened in programs, in your programs? How were you able to, did you shift to Zoom? Did you actually, were able to keep most of your classes online? Most programs didn't. They had a very small subset of programs that kept on going, while others, learners just didn't have the right devices. One of the things that I think interestingly New Jersey did, which was in the news, which probably a lot of you know, is that sometime during the beginning of the pandemic, they really led the country in making sure that all K-12 families have a device. The connectivity still was a little shaky, but they wanted to make sure that all children had access to a device that they were able to then potentially log in and access remote instruction. The problem there sometimes is, of course, that, let me see, what do you think the problem there is? If nobody types, I could just go on with it and just tell you. The problem with giving devices is that they're taken away. There were, I think, like 400,000 devices that were given to families. And what happened, and I'm not sure if it happened in New Jersey, but in other parts of the country, in Massachusetts and in other parts, every time there was a school vacation week, the summer came, those devices were all sort of gathered back and taken back into the school, which is a huge problem. And I think as we think about digital equity, we also need to be thinking about how do we think about solutions that are more than just band-aids and really make a difference in the way our learners and our programs experience digital integration, technology integration within our programs. So it's not just a temporary fix, but a new way of being, where we're really thinking about bridging the divide in a way that it's actually, sort of cemented, that it's not just a rope that's thrown and then sort of taken back when the time is not convenient. So that has been a major problem across the country, where I think, even don't want to be political here, but I think your governor did declare the digital divide to be sort of over in New Jersey by giving all those computers. And that, I think, is something to really think about as to how people are thinking about the digital divide and fixing it, as we all work towards really get to the problem from a digital equity perspective and make changes that are more permanent, which is integrating, digital skills and other solutions within programs and making sure learners have the right devices. There's some really interesting interesting chat responses to what some programs were doing during the pandemic. So feel free to check that out.
So,
as,
sorry,
go ahead.
Priyanka, before you move on, I just want to say, you know, there's some pretty compelling research about the distribution of devices, right? And people often think, oh, they're going to be lost or they're going to be damaged or they're going to be stolen. In almost every single case where they gave out devices, there's no evidence that people mistreat them. There's no evidence that people steal them or lose them, you know. So this perception that people who may be in the position of needing these resources are somehow going to be less responsible with them than other people in society would be, right, is a very problematic perspective on members of that community. And there's absolutely no evidence to suggest that they are, right? So sometimes people want to take those devices back. They're worried about loaning them out, but there's no evidence that people are going to mistreat them or there's going to be massive amounts of theft.
That's an excellent point, Eric. And that's one of the pieces that we talk about a lot. We have worked with programs across multiple states who gave out and loaned out, you know, hundreds and hundreds of laptops or devices or tablets. And the theft piece is completely missing. There's none of that. There were like a handful of cases where there was just a misunderstanding. It's like the device was gonna come back on May 20th, and then, you know, like, oh, we have lost 10 devices. It's like, no, they came back 3 days later. People just, you know, it's like me forgetting to send back my child's library book. It's like, we just have to find it in the house. That's all. Like, we're not, it's just a matter of a misunderstanding, or, you know, finding the time to actually go and return a device. The other thing that I think I want to get into a little bit when we talk about what the status of devices is in the country is also talk about the assumptions that are made when devices are lent to people. But I'll get to it in a minute. And Ghazala, it's good to know that you also started a device loaner program and have not had any issues yet. That's a messaging that we really want to be talking about a lot more, because there's, of course, this assumption is always there. It's like, we cannot potentially give something that's so expensive because people are just going to never show back, you know, never show up and return the device. So before we get into a word soup, I wanted to take a minute to talk about the words, definitions, combination of words that are used a lot as you think about your own programming, as you know, on at the state level, at the federal level. There's different people use a lot of these terms interchangeably, from digital equity to digital inclusion, skills, literacy, resilience. Resilience, of course, is something that Digital Us Coalition is a multi-stakeholder coalition that World Education leads, and I co-lead the Digital Us Coalition, and we came up with that definition ourselves. So that's a little made up because we wanted something to really encompass this idea of digital fluency and comfort that is needed by all of us, not just people who are at the foundational digital skills level. We're all learners, and I think this sort of captures the digital skills component of what a lifelong learner would need as we all learn how to problem solve using technology. So I'll just pause for a second, and I want you to read through these definitions, and I would love to see if people have any comments or questions. So I'm just going to pause for like 20 seconds.
So Priyanka, the only thing that I would add, I think apropos of what we were just saying, is that under digital equity, in addition to, you know, access to the information, you know, there's also perceptions and labels and things like that are aspects of digital equity, you know, in terms of who's put in what categories and things like that is also an issue of digital equity.
That's right. And so the definitions that are here, some of them are obvious. I talked about digital less definition. The definition for digital literacy, which is part of the WIOA legislation and some other, it's widely used. It comes from the American Library Association. The digital skills definition that's widely accepted comes from UNESCO. And the other two, digital equity and inclusion, those are now part of Digital Equity Act, which is the law of the land as of some months ago. So these are the definitions that I think we need to understand. And, I think we might have ideas, just like Eric has, about how they should be a little different. But interestingly, equity and inclusion, it's now these are part of the Digital Equity Act, and I am really planning to talk a little bit more about the potential for supporting digital skills programming with Digital Equity Act resources tomorrow. So little additional ad for that. That is something that I think was part of the infrastructure bill, and that does give states a little bit more money to put towards digital literacy programming. Do people have any questions about any of this? I think Hope and Denise, you're saying that it's important, digital resilience is important, so everybody has the ability to adapt to the frequency of changing technology. And I think that that's the piece, that's the reason why we came up with this idea of resilience, because a lot of times you and I can think, oh yeah, I'm very comfortable using my phone and laptop. I got this, like I have it under control. But there is this idea of being digitally resilient, having the confidence to adapt to changing digital skill demands. Something that your students have experienced in the past 2 years, where they went from never even hearing about Zoom to really using it with a little orientation and onboarding process, perhaps initially, or perhaps not. So that's another piece that I think is important to remember. So when it comes to, let me just go back to this idea of digital inclusion. So the other way of really thinking about it is, if you take digital resilience to the side, if you think about digital equity and inclusion, another way of remembering is digital inclusion usually refers to certain activities which, if done well on a continued basis, will lead to digital equity. That's not how it's defined in the law. That's how I remember it, because it's very distinct activities that should lead to digital equity if done well. It's similar to the relationship between digital skills and literacy. Like there could be standalone digital skills, but then that leads to digital literacy. And just from a matter of gossip, there's a lot of schools of thought right now about completely doing away with digital literacy and just talking about digital skills, something that I don't agree with, just because they are trying to kind of figure out how to reduce these terms so that they're being used. Everybody knows what the other one is talking about, and they're not being used interchangeably. So when we think about digital inclusion, and that's where we want to get to digital equity, we need to work on digital inclusion. And the working towards digital equity, which is the theme, is and needs to be a collection of digital inclusion activities. And the way digital inclusion is talked about a lot of times is like the 3 prongs of digital inclusion, or 5 prongs, which is the way I like to talk about it. The first one is definitely affordable, robust internet service. So a connectivity that people have access to, internet connectivity, then internet enabled devices that meet user needs, and digital literacy training. I mean, that's key. So those are the 3 that a lot of people talk about, but there's other 2. One of which is technical support. What happens when things don't go your way, and how are we thinking about that? Technical support doesn't have to be a person with a headphone and a microphone that you can call or go to sort of the Apple Genius Bar with. It can be somebody within your community, like a digital navigator that provides just-in-time support so that people are able to develop that digital resiliency as they interact more and more with technology. And lastly, something that's not talked about a lot, which I think is really critical. And a lot of times it's not talked about a lot because it kind of goes against this whole idea of, I hate to say it, but capitalism. Like it is about how applications, online content needs to meet user needs. Like if a lot of people who are accessing public school portals, for example, um, only have a smartphone only internet, and you'll see a very clear correlation between people who have so for example, in New Jersey, let's take New Jersey, for example, if your income is around $20,000 or less, about half of the folks with that sort of annual salary don't have a broadband connection or any sort of wired connection. They probably are relying on either library internet, like at a learning computer lab somewhere, or on their phone. So think about the platform that a school system is using to communicate with families. And if it's not designed to meet user needs, if it's very sort of heavy in terms of data, if it's not mobile friendly, then it leads to exclusion right away. But I think that is sort of where there needs to be a lot of buy-in from the vendors, from ed tech developers. And that's kind of where we're really lacking. I think we're focusing a lot on the other pieces. And I'm sure a lot of you have experienced it just with, if I hope nobody is here from Burlington English, for example, but a lot of times Burlington English some years ago didn't used to be easy to navigate and access on phone. That has changed. I think since the last couple of years, they have really moved in that direction and really responded to, for it to be more agile, and it loads faster on phones and doesn't use as much data. Lastly, the other thing, and this is one of my pet peeves, that's why I'm spending a little time on here. The other thing to also understand as you are thinking about, say, what you're asking your learners to do online, is always thinking about downloading an app is not always the best idea, because sometimes the app can balloon on their phone and really they might not have the space on their phone to use that app. And a lot of times, the more you use an app, the sort of bigger and bigger it becomes, because it caches a lot of the content. So thinking, there are really important things to keep in mind as we think about this idea of digital inclusion, but then also this idea of integrating technology into instruction that really needs to meet user needs, not what's cool or not what's being, what you love to do in terms of a tech tool. So, okay, I'm gonna get off my soapbox now and really talk about the status of connectivity. So thinking about internet access, a lot of us forget that a significant number of households are not connected to broadband. These numbers are sort of pre-pandemic. So some of these numbers have changed during the course of the pandemic, but not drastically. So out of about 18 million households that are not connected to broadband, which means that they're either relying on satellite internet, which there are not a lot of households that are. Others are probably just, using hotspots in their community, or probably no internet, or using their smartphones for internet. Out of the 18 million households throughout the country, urban and rural areas, how do you think it breaks down? The quiz, pop quiz. You can put your answers in the chat or speak up. What percentage or what number, how many million households are in urban areas and how many in rural areas? They both have to add to 18 million, but still, just one of those numbers will be fine.
Right. It's also a pop numeracy quiz.
That's right. Any guesses? Before I start calling out people, I do know some of you on this call.
Right. There's 65 people, but everybody can't hide.
Just throw a number at me.
All right. So Lori.
All right, Lori. That is pretty close. It's about 15 million urban and 3 million rural. The data we have is 14 million urban. And some of this has changed, but so that's really close to what the real answer is. And to me, that's always a staggering number. That's such a huge number of households that are not connected to broadband are in urban areas. Because if you listen to the news, if you listen to sort of like, when the presidential elections were taking place, there was a lot of conversation about broadband access. Everything is focused on rural internet access. And for two reasons. One, it is a real problem. Like having 4 million households not connected to any sort of internet is a huge problem. And a lot of times these are really rural areas where sometimes they don't even have cell coverage. So it is a matter of access too, but it is a huge problem in terms of the urban areas. And sometimes there's multiple reasons for that. Sometimes it's they're low income areas that are urban areas where there's no broadband connection available. Sometimes the internet service providers actually don't even lay the pipes in certain parts of the city because they assume that not enough people are going to subscribe and it's not going to be worth their time. This is going to change just because of the Digital Equity Act and some other couple of $1 billion that the government is using to subsidize broadband access and laying of sort of new connections. But the thing that I also want you to also know is about 15% of adults rely on smartphone only internet. Now you'll say, hey, all of these numbers are great, but how does it impact me and how does it impact my learners? And for that, if you look at the graph on the side, you'll kind of see how there's a very clear connection to digital exclusion when it comes to this number. And people who are making less money are not able to afford smartphones or home broadband. And this is information that you need to know from your programmatic perspective in the community you're in as to what the internet adoption looks like. A lot of programs I work with use that information, try to get to that information right at the intake so that they have a sense of how many devices a learner's family has, what is their internet connection, so that they are able to even understand what happens if they have to go back to the Zoom classroom instruction. If your programs have actually started in-person instruction, it's still good information to have to understand what the needs of your sort of communities are. And another thing to also think about is people actually really need to understand why a lot of urban areas, why people don't have broadband in urban areas. It's a matter of basically affordability. The cost is too high. And that's one of the reasons why there's a new initiative from the government, which was launched with a lot of excitement about a couple of weeks ago. An earlier version existed from about 6 months ago. It's called the Affordable Connectivity Program. And I'm looking forward to telling you more about it tomorrow. But that's also something that I'll probably, that you can look up. It's called ACP. There's ways in which you can talk about that with your learners. Pretty much all of our learners are eligible to get vouchers for about $30 per month internet. That's still expensive for a lot of people, but it's better than $60 to $70, which a lot of people pay right now, or don't pay and don't have and don't get an internet connection at home. Any questions about that?
Well, Priyanka, before you move on, the other thing I think that's important to note about accessibility is that there's a number of states in this country that by law prohibit the development of municipally owned broadband, right? So like by law, they enforce that private companies are going to be the ones that are responsible for providing broadband, which prevents local communities from coming together and solving their problems. And there's a number of places that have done that, community-owned, free Wi-Fi across the community. So in that case, it's not only a resource issue, but it's a political issue in terms of who's passing laws to prevent people from actually doing something about the problem.
Right. So I think there's definitely some of that. The other thing also is that even just the new money that's coming from the government for new broadband connections, it's primed for large internet service providers. So even if small internet service providers are not able to access that just because of the way the laws are written. So there is definitely I don't want us to be all rosy-eyed about, oh, there's billions of dollars coming to fix that digital divide. Like, we really need to be advocating for our learners and in our communities to make sure that we're able to have our voices heard when it comes to what's happening in our local communities. The other thing that I didn't talk about before in terms of affordable internet is I wanted to get a sense of how many of your programs distributed hotspots during the pandemic, because that's something that happened a lot, where large library system purchased a lot of hotspots and they were loaning them. A lot of adult education programs were doing the same, where they were loaning hotspots to their learners so that they were able to connect to classes. Was that happening in your programs?
And you can put answers in the chat.
So one of the things there to know, because that was something that was happening a lot in Massachusetts and in a lot of other states as well, is people were thinking, oh, we'll just give hotspots, everybody's going to be all set, and there was a huge problem. There's lots of anecdotal evidence that the hotspots, hundreds and hundreds of them in school districts, were never even turned on, because you can tell when a hotspot is turned on. And it was mostly because of digital literacy. Like, people were not comfortable in turning something on, figuring out how to connect it. Maybe it gets disconnected. How do you connect it again? So, like, going back to this idea of digital comfort and fluency. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in terms of solutions and how to solve for something like that. And that was something that became a huge sort of a joke in terms of giving away devices, and hotspots were great, but like, how many were even turned on? And most actually systems didn't have ways to track it. So a lot of data was not shared, but the ones that were sharing it were talking about how they were not being turned on. So the other thing to also think about is this idea of devices. Like, how many of your learners have laptops? A lot of you talked about how you shifted to Zoom classes. And the learners I know, the programs I work with, most learners were attending classes on Zoom using their phones. Was that true for your learners? I probably assume so. Like, a lot of learners were using their phones. Have you ever done Zoom on your phone? It's extremely limiting. Like, you kind of have to scroll through, and then the window closes and then you have to open it. It's not very conducive to learning. And that's another assumption that I think we make when we say, oh yeah, my classes were fine, we just shifted to Zoom and we just learned online, which I think is wonderful. Something is better than nothing, but also to think about how the instruction needs to shift when learners are barely able to kind of keep up. If things are being shown, I had teachers kind of showing paper, like pages on like a camera, be like, hey, look, can you see this? And it's impossible to see on a phone, but on a laptop, perhaps, yes. So thinking about how we're thinking about instruction in that access context is something to really be cognizant about. So in New Jersey, apparently, according to the American Community Survey, about 89% of households have at least one device, which is not a phone, but something other than a phone. So a laptop or tablet or something. And something also more interesting to think about is how there's a direct correlation between, particular cities or counties where about 70% have a phone or a laptop, while apparently like 98% of families who are living in North and Central New Jersey have a device, have a laptop. So thinking about how that really makes a difference in the way somebody can learn, apply for a job, access, the public school system is also very important. And there's a really interesting, and I'll probably chat it here. There's this organization called Digitunity, which is one of our partners. If you go to their website, I mean, if you just Google Digitunity, you'll get to their website. They are, they're a consortium of used devices and how to distribute them, of refurbishers, but they also do a lot of, they have started to do some reports about the state of digital devices. And one of their reports, which I'm not able to link to because you actually have to sign up and give your email to get access to the report, and we're not able to get permission to give that report, but to share that report. But if you go to their website, you'll see a report that talks about how you do need a large screen device to really learn and access most of the content that's on internet. Like, it really breaks the myth about how mobile access is access, but it's not complete access to content and learning and other things. So that's another really important thing to think about, is making sure that you have an idea of what your learners are using, and how we're using those devices when we're thinking about sending PDFs and other interesting assumptions about what they will be able to do on a phone. Any questions about that? And I would really urge you to get, take a look at that report. You do have to give your email to them, but they're a nonprofit. They don't spam you too much. They're newish organizations. They're trying to track who's getting to the reports, but it's a good report. All right, I will.
Priyanka, one of the things that I'll add to that, and I think we've had some discussions about this, is that there's sort of there's often an overlap between a variety of student needs. So some of my students who only have access through phone also have vision issues and may not have the appropriate glasses, right? And so they don't have the resources to have the glasses that would even make the phone work. And so, like, reading small text on a phone or even enlarging it, right? So there's often many things that confound the situation for the learners.
That's right. And in partnership with Adobe, we're part of this readability consortium, and we are looking into that exact problem of readability. And there is a free option that Adobe Reader has, and you can download it for free. It's called the liquid mode. It's not the most user-friendly, which is something that they're trying to fix, and we're helping them pilot that. But it is a way of experiencing PDFs. If you have difficulty looking at content on a screen, and or in general, like how you're interacting with the PDF in a more user-friendly way. So that's definitely an option to think about. So going into this idea of digital skills, I mean, I don't want to spend a lot of time here because this is obvious. We experience it, with our learners. We experience it with people in our lives where, there is a sense of, oh, I know how to use a phone, but if a window closes, you wouldn't know how to get it back up, and people just kind of freeze. And a lot of these numbers, again, are pre-pandemic. Some of it has changed over that over the course of 2 years, mostly by force. So we have sort of made some progress where more than half are probably are comfortable using technology to learn because there was no other way. But one of the other things to think about is the sort of like the last thing here that talks about how 58% of millennials lack problem-solving skills in a digital environment, and this was done more in a work environment. So, and also always being cognizant about our assumptions around digital skills. A lot of times I see that if we see folks using, and it's mostly a phone, the assumption is that people have the right digital skills to do anything and everything just because they're using a phone. The truth is that it's a lot of times most people are using 3 to 4 apps on their phone, and that's about it. Like, that's what they're comfortable with. That's what they're using. So it is about building that fluency and comfort they have with those apps and building on it so that you're not saying, hey, you don't know much because you're only using this, but it's like, hey, because you use WhatsApp, let's think about how we can use WhatsApp in the classroom. And because you're using WhatsApp, like look at these other options that are similar to WhatsApp so that people are comfortable and sort of using those transferable digital skills when it comes to developing and building on their existing digital skills. Is that something that, you know, I would love to hear from all of you about, is that something that you have been doing over the course of the pandemic, is using meeting learners where they are online, like using WhatsApp to connect with your learners in virtual classrooms. That's something that's used to happen a little bit, but is happening a lot more now. Others are using Google Classroom for the same exact purpose because it's something that's easy for learners to access once they have been onboarded onto it, but also building their digital skills from where they are right now. And as I take a pause, I'll say one more thing before. I think, Tanya, you're saying that some students contact you through WhatsApp. I think that's definitely one of the ones we're seeing really makes a huge difference, especially in connecting community, like maintaining that sense of community in a time when there's a lot more remote learning going on. It gives a sense of classroom cohesion in a time when people are, you know, like all of us are remote. So there's definitely.
They also, I'm sorry, they
Go
also
ahead.
send messages through WhatsApp for Mother's Day, for the holidays. So that they're used to that, and I think they are very comfortable with that that setting.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Mhm. Yeah, I see a lot of WhatsApp in the chat. I think that's really, and it is about what's working for your learners. Darnell, you're talking about how you use Skype with them, and Signal is another one. It's depending on who the learners are. Like some classrooms and programs I know use WeChat, so it is, and some others use Telegram. So there's lots of as long as there's guidelines in the classroom about how we're using it together, there's an understanding of how we're using it together and interacting with each other. Those are really good places to start to get them to really think about technology as an integral part of learning, not just sort of like the social piece. The one other thing that I'll say that around building on people's existing digital skills is, at the very start of the slide, I said, you know, we shouldn't make assumptions about what people know just because they have a phone. The other thing to really remember is to also really respect what a lot of people actually do know in terms of using laptops, using phones. They just might not know it in English. And this is something we're really made a huge leap when we worked with a lot of programs where all they had to do was have similar, you know, like small how-to videos in Haitian Creole, in a lot of other languages, done by volunteers, by teachers, sending it to learners. And they're like, oh, that's what you meant when you said, this is what I have to click. Okay, now I know, because digital skills doesn't have to have a language. Like, it is technology. And then once you get comfortable with it, you can easily sort of use it in a transferable way to develop that digital comfort and fluency. So that's always something to remember. And if you have done that with your learners, like reaching out to them, onboarding them onto Zoom and other things using the language they're most comfortable in, that is something to share with others, and also something that's low cost and easy to do and really respects them for what they know and can do online, actually. Any questions? Perfect. Okay, so I want you to take a minute and think about, what are you doing already to address digital equity in your programs? Some of you talked about how you're using, how you gave out loaner devices during the pandemic. Others are using WhatsApp, Signal, and other apps to build that connection online using technology, using Zoom. What are some of the other ways you're building sort of this digital equity with your learners within your programs? So as you think about that, I mean, I think feel free to kind of share as I, try to wrap up here is thinking about how we need to center digital equity. We need to really collect data and build intentional partnership and think about what we're already doing to move forward. And these are some of the guiding questions we're going to start with tomorrow is what does the data look like within your community? How are you collecting that data? Do you actually have data, and what data do you need to collect in addition to what you're already collecting so that you can device your programs around it. You can design the program around it and think about ways in which you can use that data for partnerships, for getting low-cost internet into your community, get students access to the ACP vouchers that I was talking about, the Affordable Connectivity Program that are accepted by most internet service providers. There's some links here. You'll get this slide deck in your, Eric will share this. And we'll also go a little bit deeper and talk about it tomorrow so that we're coming from it from some evidence in terms of what the need is within your county. A lot of times these are county level information. And lastly, I want to quickly introduce this idea of digital navigators, which is a service delivery model that provides just-in-time supports for technology access and digital skills development at accessible locations and virtually. And we piloted this over the course of the pandemic, which was very hard to do because people were still struggling with the pandemic because we started before vaccines were even on the scene. And really made sure work with programs across different states to kind of see how they can think about in-person support, sometimes in person, sometimes over the phone or over FaceTime and other video conferencing to make sure that people are able to get their digital literacy questions answered. They're able to get connected to low-cost internet, get connected to devices if they need one. And that's something to, that was something that we have captured in a digital navigator implementation playbook. There's a link at the end of this slide deck. But one of the things that I really want to touch upon is how every time somebody says, oh, there's a problem, we need a solution, and we need some like a new program like digital navigators, and people are like, oh, what, another thing? Like we're very busy. So my approach always is thinking about how you're embedding these services. So it's not a new job or a position, but it is thinking about how are you going to be embedding this digital equity centered digital navigation services within your program so that you're able to get a sense of what your community needs are, how you're meeting them through your existing resources, and then also accessing additional resources. We had a lot of programs integrate these services during advising orientation activities. Their career coaches or sort of admissions counselors also serve as digital navigators so that the learners feel supported in terms of their digital literacy, digital skills needs. And similarly, working with libraries and community-based programs, also thinking about what already does exist in your program, in your local area that you can partner with local organizations with. A lot of times people are able to partner with banking institutions for, laptop refurbishing, recycling. There's a lot of times there are activities going on in your community, which you just need to look around and get a sense of what's going on. Maybe there's a digital equity coalition in your community already happening that you need to connect to, or maybe start your own. So we'll talk a little bit more about that tomorrow. So these are some of the guiding questions that are answered in the digital navigation playbook about how and why should you think about embedding digital navigation services in your programs, and also this notion of a digital equity ecosystem. Any questions? And you can also bring your questions. I know it's the end of a long day, but you can also bring your questions to the workshop tomorrow. And again, this is just want to do a call back to digital skills, thinking about how what we think people need to know in terms of digital skills could be different from why they think they should have digital skills. A lot of learners, a lot of us just say, I think I am okay in terms of digital skills. That's the number one answer I get. It's like, what digital skills programming? I think I know everything. So it is about, a lot of times, the value of contextualizing some of the digital skills instruction and embedding it within programming. For a lot of other learners, it is about talking about what else they can do if they have, additional digital skills, like having an email account. That's something that millions of adults don't have right now in the country, and how that can be sort of catalyst for them connecting into their kids' teachers and other community activities, etc. And lastly, it is a rapidly shifting landscape. What was optional before is critical now. So we do need to double down and move forward together and exchange ideas, like tons of interesting ideas here. And that were shared in the chat. People are doing interesting things. So even, having a way to learn from each other. If somebody said something that you think is interesting about how, say, Suzanne is using Voxy in her program, that would be a good way to connect with each other and get some of your questions answered. And lastly, I want to leave you with this idea of a digital equity mindset. Yes, it is something additional to add to your programming, but it is also something that I think is critical, and digital equity needs to be integrated within all program design and delivery in 2022 and beyond. And that was made sort of pretty clear through the course of the pandemic, and how we're preparing our learners to learn and work now and into the future. So with that, I will leave some resources here, and I hope you'll join me tomorrow morning when we talk a little bit more about what does digital equity, what can it look like in your programming? And we have some resources to guide you as you think about that. So thank you so much.
All right, thanks, Priyanka. So yeah, if there's any big picture questions that folks have now, and while you're sort of, maybe thinking about that, in terms of like, as one of your last slides was moving from it's important to have to it's essential to have, I was just thinking the other day that the COVID testing site in my county closed, right? And now I needed to take my son and myself to get a test. And it took me actually quite some time to figure out where the new site was, right? And I called the state didn't know, even though it's there, like it's connected to it, right? So some of these skills are essential, right, for survival, like finding out, where a vaccine site is, right, where a testing site is. These things can be really crucial and not easy to find for even people who have, a long experience with it, right? Because it's a new thing, or if it's not particularly like user friendly, right? It can be really problematic.
That's right. And I have to say, that's something that I did as a volunteer over the course of the pandemic. There's this organization called COVID Vaccine Angels, which is just a Slack group of all of us who speak different languages, to basically be those tech people who people would call us, and we would make their vaccine appointments for them when vaccines were being rolled out before, just because hundreds of thousands of people in the Boston area were not able to access the website, the state website, and that was the only way to get an appointment. So that's definitely critical, and that continues to be the case now, where a lot of those efforts actually have wrapped up, because the volume is not the same, but people are still being excluded, just like you experienced, Eric.
Right. And even there's a couple of people mentioned this in the chat about spam. I've been using email for like 80 years. I still never check my spam, right? And so just, I don't make it a regular habit, right? And then, I've learned to not get angry at somebody for not responding, because I'm like, oh shoot, maybe it's in the spam. I never go and look. I remember a couple of years ago, like I called an airline pre-pandemic. I called an airline to be like, oh, I want to change this. I'm like, oh, did you get the email about when your flight was changed to? And I was like, no, you never sent me any such thing. And like, it's in spam, right? So yeah. So any other big picture questions, thoughts for Priyanka?
I'm just going to say one last thing, because somebody said that email, a couple of people said that email continues to be a problem for a lot of the learners. Just a tip, this is something that we have learned over a period of time, is a lot of programs I work with, they have this whole workshop of, let's get you started on email. This is your Gmail account. This is your user ID. This is your password. Your password is 1234, but change it. And in the end, the problem becomes, I mean, I think there's more sort of cybersecurity piece and the best practice around passwords being one problem there. But what we have learned, as you think about this, doing with your learners, that it is important for them to do it, for it to be a habit to check their email. And we have learned through our multiple programs that they need to be able to log in, log out over a period of a couple of weeks, multiple times, to even remember what that user ID and password is, so that they're not always resetting it. And I think we all know it. Like, if you go to a website you haven't been to in a long time, you have no idea what your user ID and password is. So developing that habit of how email is critical these days, and thinking about little things like that you can really help your learners with, can really make a difference in the way that they experience our tech-enabled world today.
So I encourage you to come to the session tomorrow morning to dig into some of this, particularly, as Priyanka said, thinking at the program level, coming up with plans. So this is the kind of global picture, but how do we do this at the program level? Okay. All right. Well, thanks for sharing, Priyanka. I think got the conference off to a great start. A lot of important information. And also just, as you're stressing, it's a mindset, right? Like, to take this on, it's a mindset. So,
Thanks.
all right. Well, thanks for coming, and thanks for all the work that you and World Education do in this area.
Thank you so much. See
Yeah.
some and all of you tomorrow. Bye.
Yeah, great. All right. So then the next part of the program is the awards. So I'm going to turn things to Connie. Connie, do you need to do the introductions, or?
I'd be happy to do the introductions. Thanks, Eric. Hi, I'm Connie Schwein. I'm a member of the New Jersey Association for Lifelong Learning Board and the chair of the awards committee. And it is my pleasure to introduce again Linda Roma, who is our president, and will be presenting the President's Award from NJALL. Linda?
Thank you, Connie. Thank you for the welcome. Hello, everybody again. I'm still Linda Roma. For those of you who joined us a little bit later, like Connie said, I'm this year's president. And as part of my role as president, I have the honor to select the recipient of the President's Award. And, with most positions, whether they're volunteer or they're paid positions, you have aspects that you love to do, and there's some, well, not so much. And I would have to say that during this year as the president, selecting the recipient for this award brought me the most joy. It was really very a joyful experience to do. When Connie reminded me that the president could give an award, it took me about a nanosecond to look into my heart and realize who was most deserving of this. And please know that it took the board another nanosecond to agree with me and to give the final approval. So this year's award goes to a group of people that are dedicated, passionate, and committed to student success. They reached out, they propped up, they lent a hand, they lent a shoulder, they gave rides, they gave test vouchers, they coached, they advised, they counseled, and they did all this before they began teaching class. It is with our deep, deep affection, gratitude, and love that this year's President Award goes to all of you. It goes to the instructors, the tutors, the coordinators, and all the administrators. Unfortunately, we do not have a plaque to give to everyone. However, If you're comfortable doing this, I invite you to place your hand on your heart. And if you just take a deep breath and take in how deeply, deeply you are appreciated, you're valued, you're needed, and you're loved. So I'm just going to take a breath for a second and let you take all that in. I'm going to close with another favorite quote, and this one is by Octavia Butler from the Parable of the Sower. All that you touch, you change. All that you change, changes you. Please continue to change, continue to touch. We need you desperately now more than ever. So again, my heartfelt gratitude to each and every one of you for the work that you continue to do on behalf of our precious, precious students. Thank you all so much.
All right. So where you're in groups, maybe you can take turns buying each other a cup of coffee as a
There
way
you go.
as a way to recognize each other. But no, I mean, Connie in the past has done a great job of plaques and things like that. So I'm glad that Connie is not being tasked with coming up with 780 plaques. So that would not work. So yeah, I want to thank everybody for that. And in light of that too, I also want to share another set of awards. And this is, we had our annual learner writing contest again this year. And this is the first public unveiling of the winners. We have a session on Saturday where some of the winners are going to come and present their work and read from their work. They've all been notified via email. They'll get a check and a certificate. In the summer, they'll get a printed copy of the magazine. And then we will have then we'll have a PDF version of the magazine. So I don't, is it big enough for people to be able to see? Speaking of like eyesight and being online, I'll scroll down a little bit. So some of these students are returning champions. Some of them are new, which is great. Any of you online, these are your students and you want to give them a shout out?
I do.
Okay.
Andrea Serrano is my student and has been for a few years. And without Zoom, she would not have been able to participate in our program in Somerset County because she lives in Trenton. And she is wonderful, just wonderful.
Yes, I think she's coming on Saturday. So she's going to read her poem on Saturday, which is great.
Good.
Right. Anybody else here that your student won?
Yes, this is Lynn Sternstein. Hi, I'm from JVS, and we have 3 students. Really proud of all of them. Very specifically, I wanted to talk about Vera. She's been our student since before the pandemic. And when we first met her, she didn't know how to use a mouse. She was really, really digitally challenged. And the fact that she has persisted with our classes that are virtual now, and that she wrote and, you know, put herself out there and to win, to be one of the winners. I know how meaningful it was to her. She was so excited. So so that's real perseverance for her, and she's just done wonderful things with our program.
All right, and I want to thank JVS for year in and year out organizing and helping the students submit pieces. I think it's really great.
Our teachers, I don't know if any of our other teachers are on right now, but they really go above and beyond. They spend so much time beyond the class time helping, you know, encouraging our students, and then, you know, meeting with them if they want to on, you know, on their work. So it's really wonderful.
That I will also say with regards to Vera's piece, memoir is always the hardest to evaluate, right? Because, you know, poetry, nonfiction, fiction, photography, but memoir, people are sharing sometimes incredibly vulnerable parts of their experience, right? They're, you know, as Lynn said, they're really putting themselves out there. They're taking the most compositional risk you can ever take, right? Putting yourself out there. So it's always hard to be like, which one's better, because people are sharing incredible things. It's always an honor to read what they have to share. But it means that Vera, like Alberto and Stephanie, like just really put it all together in a way that not only shared an important part of their life, but the writing, the language just really was able to communicate it in a way that was really evocative and really resonated. So I look forward to everybody seeing their work when the full magazine comes out. Okay. All right. Thanks. And anybody else that has it's your student? All right. Well, great. I hope some of you will join us the Saturday morning session when we do have the students coming and then sharing. Okay. Now I think the next part of the program is a scholarship update, an update about the scholarship program.
Okay. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much to NJALL, my fellow board members on NJALL for sponsoring this conference. And I know, Eric, that you put a lot of work into it. I see today that we have 63 participants on here, so I hope the numbers stay up until Saturday. This afternoon, I am going to give you a little update about our NJALL scholarship. My name is Danielle Richardson. I am a member of the NJALL Scholarship Committee, along with Yushindi, Lisa, Linda, and of course, Judy. A little bit about our scholarship program. What do? We give, this program gives NJALL the opportunity to recognize those we serve who are our adult students. We have been granting scholarships since 1992. I don't know if all of you are aware of that, but I hope that after hearing today's presentation about the scholarship, that you will have your students apply for a scholarship next year. Each year, we provide scholarships to adults who have attended or graduated from one of our programs, or have earned a New Jersey high school diploma and dreamed of continuing in higher education. NJALL just increased the amount of the scholarship, which now provides 1,000 folks, $1,000 per semester for full-time enrollment in higher education. If you prorate that, it comes to a maximum of $8,000. There is also a bonus of $500 for scholarship winners who complete their associate degree, and $1,000 for those who complete a bachelor's degree. So again, I hope that you will be so interested in having your learners who have participated in your program to apply for these scholarships, that maybe next year we'll see more people applying for the scholarship. This year, we've been working closely with 3 scholarship winners. They're Christy Chan, who is a 2019 winner. She graduated from Bergen County College and was recruited by Columbia University, where she is currently attending. You can read Christy's story. It's going to be on, if you go to our NJALL website, you'll see Christy's story there. Martha Elena Enriquez is another one of our winners. She was in 2021. She's a mother of 2 sons and is working on her degree in practical nursing while working as a certified nursing assistant. And of course, we have Joey Barner, who is also a 2021 winner. He is studying art at Sussex County Community College. Most of our students may not even consider applying for the scholarship unless you encourage them to apply. So again, I'm going to have to stress, I think this is the 3rd time I'm saying it, please let your learners know about these scholarships. If you inspired any one of your students or graduates to apply or have written them a letter of recommendation, we thank you wholeheartedly. We will be selecting this year's winners soon, but it is not too soon to identify and encourage your students and graduates who might be good candidates to plan to apply when next year's application comes out. We are planning to award the scholarships this year on June 24th, 2022. And last of all, I want you to know that the NJ Scholarship Program is supported entirely by donations. Every penny that's donated goes directly towards the scholarship grants, and every single donation counts towards continuing this program. So please think about joining others who have invested in the future dreams of our students. More details will be coming your way if you stay in tune with the NJALL website. Please visit the site often and see when the updates are there, and do encourage your students to apply. Thank you very much. Back to you, Mr. Conference Chair.
All right, thanks for that update on a very important part of the work that NJALL does. And I want to underline what Darnell said, maybe for the fourth time then, that you encourage people to participate and send in those contributions, because as she said, 100% goes to the scholarship. There's no overhead taken out. It goes directly to the students. So I've put in the chat a link for the form to, if you need a PD certificate for today. So please click on that link, and then I'm going to close it in a little bit, and then I'll send the certificates out. Any questions before we sign off today? I want to thank everybody for coming to this first day. I think Priyanka had a lot of good information. I'm glad to hear about all of us being winners, and then all of us being able to contribute to the scholarship. Okay. All right. Well, thanks for coming. I look forward to seeing you in various sessions over the next three days. Take care.